Good morning and welcome to the Corporate Research Forum's webinar on Rethinking Talent Management. I'm Karen Ward and I will be hosting our conversation today. I'm joined here in the studio by Eleanor Radbourne from Rolls-Royce, Nick Holly, who's our Director of Learning at Corporate Research Forum, Nigel Sullivan, the Group Human Resources Director of TalkTalk, and Claire Seabrook from Downstream Royal Dutch Shell. So welcome to everyone here in the studio and welcome to you out there. For those of you who haven't participated in one of our webinars before, we like to make these as interactive as possible. And so you will not only be listening to us here in the studio, but also you have the opportunity to participate and ask questions. And we'd like to start that right up front in that we are going to start with a poll. So before we get into the conversation that we're going to be having, we'd like to ask you a question. So appearing on your screens is going to be the question, do you think that talent management in your organisation is delivering what your business needs? So if you'd like to respond to that, either yes or no, and I'll just introduce some of the work that we've been doing before we get into our conversation. So the research that we've been conducting has been going on for about 18 months. We've talked to 65 thought leaders and practitioners, and we've done a survey of over 230 organisations. The research report, which was co-authored with Professor Jay Conger, was published in June, and we've just discussed the findings at an event in Amsterdam and London with Jay Conger. So we'll be sharing some of the insights from that. So what were the key findings? What we realised from the research was no surprise that talent management is a key factor for business success, and just about anybody who you will ask will put it at the top of their priority list in terms of challenges for their business. What was interesting for us in the survey that we did was that only a fifth, so 20% of respondents said they were satisfied with the outcomes of their efforts, and even less than that, only 17% said that their organisation was effective in predicting and planning for talent management and future talent needs. We find that the way organisations tend to manage talent today has not kept up with the way that the world is moving. Much of what is considered good practice currently in organisations was actually invented in the 1950s and 1960s, and as we know, the world has changed somewhat since that time. And in today's highly competitive global business context, organisations expect individuals to be much more in charge of managing their own careers. Jobs for lives are no longer the norm, and the demographic shape of the workforce is changing. So CRF's conclusions are that talent management works best when certain conditions are met, and that's what we're going to be exploring on this webinar today. So firstly, there's a clear alignment between business strategy and talent plans. Secondly, there are robust but flexible workforce plans that are built on where the organisation is heading, not where it is today. The organisational culture supports and values people development, and leaders are visibly committed to making this happen. And finally, talent processes are kept simple, are well executed, and are integrated and consistent with other people's processes. So that's what we found when we went out and talked to all of these folks. Let's see what the views were in terms of what you've been saying out there, whether we've got the poll results yet. So let's have a look. So 26% of you think that yes, your talent management is delivering, but 74% of you are saying no. So that's not dramatically different to what we found in our survey. So let's have a few more optimists out there. So let's pick up here in the studio and let me go to Claire first. So from your experience within Shell, what do you think is some of the reasons behind why satisfaction is so low?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think, first of all, I think CRF's conclusions are probably the right ones. I think talent management has to deliver the right outcomes for the business, and it has to be seen as truly value add. Now, I think all of our businesses, they do exist nowadays in a fast VUCA world, but the problem is that talent management doesn't always reflect this. So we tend to be process heavy, which can make us slow, inflexible, and we find it hard to change. And I think people are starting to question whether they're getting sufficient value versus the effort that they have to put into our processes. And I also think that HR and business leaders look around them, and what they see is a workforce that is visibly younger, it's less experienced, and a workforce that also has different expectations and ways of working. But talent management on the whole is just not responding very quickly to the shifts. And they're already a reality. So it's not surprising when the survey results are saying that talent management is not good at predicting and planning for the future.
Okay. So you picked up there in terms of HR's role and the processes and, the changing workforce. And I'm wondering from your position, Nick, you've worked across a lot of businesses, what you're seeing in terms of, what business is saying about why it's unhappy with what's being delivered, because there's lots going on for sure.
Yeah. I think it picks up on the research and the points already made. My reflection is this year is the US election year. And I always remember Bill Clinton won the election with the statement, it's the economy stupid.
Yeah.
I think for us the reflection is it's not the process stupid. And I think that I see a lot of organisations are almost creating Swiss Army knives of talent management. And I'd ask anybody in the audience, how many of you have a Swiss Army knife? And how many of the tools on your Swiss Army knife have you ever used? Usually it's the knife, maybe the screwdriver.
Maybe the scissors.
Or the corkscrew. But most people don't even know all the tools. I think the danger in a lot of organisations is it's very process heavy, as you said, and we just over-engineer it. And the danger is that we think because it's a process and there's data coming out of it that is numeric, that then is objective.
Right.
Whereas actually any process is subjective.
Yeah.
And I think where HR really works well is not to focus on the process, but to really work in the line with the business to challenge that objectivity and drive out of that actions that are actually followed up, rather than this constant over-intellectualisation and analysis for analysis's sake.
Okay. And that, I think, is echoing something that came out at both our events in London and in Amsterdam, which is the critical role of the line manager.
Yeah.
And, in terms of the business and who has ownership for talent and stuff. Okay. So let's think about in terms of if those are some of the reasons why it's not working. Be interesting to hear what we've been doing then in terms of to improve outcomes. But I'll be curious to hear, obviously when we did our research, we polled a number of organisations, but those of you who are currently on the line would also be interested in understanding from your point of view what you think is the biggest factor. So we've heard from the contributors here in terms of process, role of HR, the changing external marketplace. So we're just going to ask you again, before I move on to speaking to our other panellists, what do you think is the biggest factor that's contributing to low satisfaction with the results of talent management? So we've given you 5 options there. So if while I'm talking to Eleanor and Nigel, you can be casting your vote, and then we'll pick up what you think about that in due course. So maybe I can turn to you, Nigel, first. Your business has been through a lot of change in the last few years, and the sector that you're in is being constantly disrupted by new technology and new opportunities. So from your point of view, what have you tried to do to improve the outcomes of talent management in your business?
Yeah, what we've tried to do, Karen, is really try to focus it on a number of things, but try to really focus what we're doing on what the business is trying to achieve. So when we think about talent management, we try to start with trying to take a future view about where we're trying to get to, whether it be a function or a division, and then work back from that, figure out the gap, okay, and try and put things in place to fill that gap. So we do have processes, but I agree with what Nick said. I think it is a tendency of HR people, me included at times, to overcomplicate things and to put process above action. And so what we've tried to do is link it to the business, get the business to own the process rather, we're the architects of the process, get the business to own it, own the actions, measure those actions, measure those outcomes, and continuously learn from it. And we're by no means there, but we do see, I'll give you an example. We had less than 30% of our sort of internal moves were promotions were internal, a few years ago, and I mean that's approached in the 40s now. So we've managed to sort of create a bit more of a internal talent market at Talk, rather than what we were doing maybe 5 years ago. Was just constantly just hiring and rehiring people instead of actually nourishing the organisation and growing the talent from within. Okay. But one of the challenges, I mean, you mentioned young organisation. I mean, Talk is a young organisation in a very dynamic, technology sector. And one of the things I'm slightly puzzled by and finding a challenge is where the ownership for one's development lies. And certainly, as personally, I've always sort of taken responsibility for my development, and hopefully, I've worked in organisations that create an environment for me to grow. But what we're finding is very often, whether it's I don't know if it's a Gen Y thing or whatever, but people seem to want that done for them more.
Okay, so there's an expectation that you as an organisation are going to be doing things to help them manage.
We are finding that, rightly or wrongly.
So I'm going to come to Eleanor, because the demographic in your organisation, both from a sort of functional background, Rolls-Royce being very engineering and scientific based, but also the demographic in terms of age is quite different to Talk. So I'm just curious about what different challenges you found in trying to improve the outcomes of your talent work.
I guess it's always interesting when you're the fourth to speak, isn't it? Because a lot of what I might want to say has already been said, and I agree with everything that people have said and can relate to it as well. I think, like I'm sure everybody else within our organisation, there are significant pockets of really excellent good practice. I would say that straight away. But a lot of that is well hidden and unknown, and I agree with the complexity piece that was said. But I also sometimes think that we perceive that it's more complex than it actually is in reality. So we're on a journey, and we about a year ago started to rethink our talent management approach. And sort of press a pause button really on what we were doing, and take a step back and say, why are we doing it? What's our overall sort of...
So going back to the core purpose.
Yeah,
how is this
I think
us?
HR gets a little bit consumed with what are the processes, what are the tools, which 9 box are we going to use, what 4 box are we going to use, and what's the process and who's accountable for it. And I wanted... together with our HR leadership team, to take a step back and look at, what's the overall philosophy? What are we trying to achieve here? And what are our aspirations as well? What are we trying to actually, what's the result that we're trying to get to? And therefore, then you can get your strategy from that. Okay. And what we did that I think was quite different is really engage our executive leadership team in that discussion. So we made it a non-HR agenda, we made it an executive management leadership agenda, and they shaped the philosophy and the aspiration.
And that's essentially what you were doing at Talk as well.
Well, I mean, support that. I mean, I've been enormously supportive chief executive, and for the last 5 years, we as an exec team spend a day and a half on this stuff. And it's sort of, I mean, that's not all of it, but we sort of review the half year.
It's a dedicated
but we dedicate it, and it sort of sparks it for the rest. It makes sure that the rest of it sort of happens, and that commitment is, and I think most chief executives get that now as well. Most people, I think, it's not just lip service. I think for a lot of people now, they believe that they know that their business results are going to be improved if they've got the right people around the table. Whereas when a few of us have been around for a few years, when I first started, you had to convince people of that. Not so much now.
Yeah.
I sometimes think we shoot ourselves in the foot with the language. When you think about talent management, when I was in corporate life working in a large global business, the word talent meant different things in different countries. In some countries it means your top 10%, in other it means everybody. I think if you engage your leadership in talking about building the capability of the organisation to deliver its strategic goals, and you're talking about talent not just as high potentials, but also as, in Rolls-Royce's case, critical engineering, critical STEM skills, then I think that engages leadership in a different way, whereas talent management sounds like another HR solution looking
Well,
for
one
a
of the
problem.
let me pull in a question we've got from Trudy, who's head of talent at Santander, who's asking specifically, what are you hearing from your business leaders or the CEOs? So you've started to answer that, but in terms of what are they saying? So in all your organisations, what has engaged them in having more of a conversation? So Eleanor,
I think from our point of view, I recognise what's just been said in that over more recent years, talent has become synonymous in Rolls-Royce with high potentials.
Okay.
And that high potential pipeline, generally speaking, is the leadership pipeline. You know, the
one
route to the top
particular
jobs.
aspect. Yeah.
However, what we've also always had is a strong pipeline of technical and professional talent into our engineering and advanced manufacturing areas, because that's really, really critical. So we have segmented in that respect. But maybe the focus shifted more towards this leadership pipeline, because that became a critical enabler for us as well, you know, in terms of good general manager capability and the impact that bad leadership can have. You know, we wanted to strengthen that pipeline. But what our business leaders are saying is, at the end of the day, you know, we are a technology company, and the world is changing really fast in that space. Yeah. And we need to be agile, and we need to think, you know, more forward thinking and scenario plan around what the world might look like in the future and what skills might be needed as well. So that's what we're hearing from our senior team, is be more creative, be more planful, think about what are the disruptive technologies coming along the line, what might happen in the world, in the world of digitisation, for instance, that will have an impact on our traditional approach to the way that we manage and develop talent.
Okay, well, interesting. We've just got the poll results through from the one that we're doing, and we've got sort of equal first place. So at least the people who are listening in at the moment are saying that the two biggest challenges for them, and the reason for low satisfaction, is there's too much focus on identifying who is talent and not enough on how to develop them. Yeah. So we kind of have this, which is what you're both saying. But also, leaders don't give talent management enough time and attention. So ironically, the thing that you were both saying is actually the thing that's helped shift in your organisations is the things that folks are struggling with on you know, out on this as well. So we're getting some consistency there. What I'd like to do is one of the key elements that came through in the research, and it links to the conversation we're just having here about sort of improved outcomes, is the extent to which talent functions make sure that what they're doing is actually aligned to the business strategy. Because one of the things, picking up on one of the other questions that CEOs want to know is, or well, and line managers often want to know, is how the hell is this going to enable me to hit my quarterly KPIs and deliver what I need to deliver. So each of you comes from quite a different sort of business context, and therefore will have different strategic challenges. So I'm just interested to hear, you know, any insights you've got on that. So maybe Claire, if I can come to you first.
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges because talent management, you have to work on different time frames simultaneously. So, I mean, the business will always have a short-term focus, which is driven by their metrics. They need to deliver things within each quarter, each year, and talent management has to support that and has to be deeply embedded into those business strategies. At the same time, and Shell's a good example, I mean, we're facing something that we refer to as the energy transition, which amongst other things is predicting a doubling of demand for energy by 2050. And of course, we've got the whole transition moving away from fossil fuels to renewables. Now, for a company like Shell, obviously that goes right to the core of what who we are, what we do. So we've had to have a fundamental rethink around core purpose, strategy, and what the business might look like in a few years' time. And of course, you know, we have to assume that many of our processes, our skills, capabilities, ways of thinking about the end customer and what we contribute to society is going to fundamentally change. And that's where talent management has to be in that conversation, you know, because you have to be engaging, you have to be helping shape, bring insights in from the outside world as well, so that you're ready to start helping shape the future, but also gives you time to then plan, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to deliver something for the business. But yeah, the common element is you have to be deeply ingrained and embedded with your business. It starts from there. If you're doing anything in talent management that you can't make a direct link back to what is the business trying to achieve, stop doing it.
Okay, but so what I'm hearing there, because one of the things we talked about in this, or we discovered in the research, was sometimes HR gets in its own way internally within itself, so acquisition competing with development. But what I'm hearing you say is HR, whoever's leading talent, needs to be very closely aligned to the strategic function within the organisation. So you're clear what's coming over the horizon and how you're tapping into that. So it's not just being close to the business now, it's also having a link back to what's going to be happening or where the potential weak things are.
Absolutely, because we all know that there are many aspects of talent management that you can't quickly change.
No.
So thinking about what does your business footprint look like in future? Are you going to be in different countries, locations, different markets? You need to know that and think about that in advance, because you can't suddenly create a workforce in a new country within 5 minutes. So that's incredibly important.
Mm. Nigel, how is that for you? Because it's a different nature in terms of you're probably looking 20, 30 years out, whereas you'll be lucky if you're looking 20 or 30 months, aren't you?
Sometimes weeks. There's a couple of things really come to mind. I agree with what Claire said there. One thing, just from the poll, that you referred to, Karen, one of the, it's a really simple, silly analogy really I've used with people internally, is that, would Alex Ferguson, at his, the height of his powers, outsource talent management to an HR department? If you're trying to convince a business leader, there's no way. There's no way he's going to do, or anybody in the peak of any sporting profession. So why would you not take it seriously? It's a very simple analogy. But one of the mistakes I've made, and this was a conversation very, very recently, is that we have got a pretty good, I've got pretty good insight into the business, see myself as a business person who happens to do HR, very much sort of conversation that everybody around the table has been sort of sharing. So that bit ain't really broken. The bit that I have not done enough of, and we were just talking about this yesterday, my team and I, is that we've thought about that, that future back thing I mentioned earlier. We've thought about it purely in talent, organisation capability, succession planning, 9-box grid sort of purposes, and reasonably well, but it's too narrow. So why wouldn't you think about, and why wouldn't you challenge those business leaders to think about it more broadly, about what they need in a more full, what skills, what behaviours, what culture,
Right.
You think about talent in terms of the supply of the talent, the demand for the talent, what you need to put in place to deliver against that. And I think there's and then the developmental interventions as well. I've been too narrow, and we're trying to broaden it out to be a bit more holistic and think about it as a whole business thing instead of 9-box grids and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how that sounds to the other people.
Yeah, well, I know. You and I have had a conversation about this before, because you again, like Claire, you're in a sector where we know that even if every graduate that graduated from engineering, went into engineering, we wouldn't have enough to necessarily give what you need for the future. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view, in terms of what you're needing to link to the business strategy, it's a much longer game, isn't it?
There's so much that we could talk about on this subject. I think it is a long game, talent. I think there is a need to respond immediately, but in our particular organisation, I'm sure others can relate to this. It's an engineering and an advanced manufacturing climate, and it's a long product cycle, and the business model is not fast moving. But actually, there's a mindset within the company of metrics, KPIs, return on investment, show me the value that you're adding. And that's quite hard in the talent space to do that quickly.
That's actually one of the questions we've had come through from somebody online who's asked, what insights have you got about trying to, if you're in a business that likes KPIs and likes return on investment, what have you actually done in that area to help educate the business?
I think data-based insights are really important. So a gift to me as I sort of was entering this role from my previous role was as a member of the Diversity Leadership Group at the Royal Academy of Engineering. And they're a rich source of insight. And one of the things there is you can appeal to engineers passionately, which is one way of trying to influence people. But if you also base that in some facts and data and, help them understand that if we don't do this or we do that, this is going to happen, the consequences.
Right. Okay.
And that for me was a big gift that I had in terms of our engineering leadership and our senior manufacturing leadership listening, because the stark reality of if you don't start taking this really seriously. And as a consequence of that, I think I said to you, Karen, we have actually moved our D&I, diversity and inclusion activity into the talent team, into the talent management team, and embedding that into everything that we do, and that's definitely baked in business strategy around needing to strengthen our STEM pipeline.
Yeah.
So that's one area.
And that builds on, so Ed Marsh, who was one of our contributors last week in Amsterdam from Nestle, was saying for him what changed the dial, one of the things that changed the dial for him and Nestle was when they were able to start getting data. And he said, because my marketing colleagues turn up at the board table with data, my finance colleagues turn up at the boardroom with data, and he said if I just go with opinion, he said, and so it's what's substantiating.
It's interesting because everybody likes opinion. I mean, we're doing that now, really,
Yes,
to a
we
certain
are.
extent.
Yeah.
But one of my favourite, even the most senior engineers in our organisation have opinions on things. And one of my favourite phrases is to say, have you finished guessing now? Because I'd like to show you, the data. And it's very powerful, and you can do that in a way that is really compelling.
Nick, did you have something?
Yeah, I think, though, we've got to be very careful about what KPIs and what data we present.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you a story to bring it to life. I was working with a large, won't mention the organisation, but they were very proud of their talent management, particularly their succession planning process. And as I said, how do you know it's good? And said, we've got 96% 112. So what do you mean by that? So for our top 300, 96% of our roles on our succession plan, we have one name identified who can succeed today, one within the next year, and two within the next 5 years. Okay, fine. So let me ask you another question. Where somebody has left one of those roles in, let's say, the last 2 years, in what percentage of the time have you replaced them with the person identified in the succession plan? Let me ask people around the table, what do you think the number was?
Quite
Low.
low.
Very low.
Yeah,
From
it was
experience.
8%.
Yeah.
Yes.
In fact, the interesting thing is they actually couldn't answer the question. They had to go away and find out the answer.
Right.
So I think the danger is, and it comes back to the point Claire you just made, it has to. I don't think it should be aligned with the strategy. It should be driven by the strategy.
Yeah.
And therefore the measures are not, are we completing a process?
Yeah. Are we not
But
ticking a box?
is this actually closing the strategic capability gap? Are we going to be able to deliver the strategy in 20 weeks or 20 years or whatever? And we need to be feeding that back, because business people don't care about our internal processes.
No.
What they want to know is, are we going to deliver that? Because I'm making promises to my shareholders, and boy, my shareholders don't like a profit warning. They don't like surprise, and the biggest challenge I face is having the capability to deliver that, particularly, as you're saying, in a STEM environment where there are 125,000 STEM job people retiring from STEM jobs every year, and yet only 93,000 graduates. Do the math.
Yes. Yeah.
As they say.
Well, and just picking up on that point, one of the big conversations, certainly in Amsterdam last week and before, was that whole issue of the demographic and retirement, and thinking about post 50. So as a mother of two teenage boys, who thinks if you're over 50 then, you're done, whereas most of us who are reaching that age know that we've probably got another 20 years in the workforce. So I think there's also there has been a lot of focus on the younger generation coming in but actually how do we get creative about the older generation and what contribution they continue to make. So we'll perhaps pick that up in a moment, because we're going to move the conversation into where we're going to go in the future. But I'd just like to, before we do that, just see what views we've got out there again. So obviously we've shared with you some of the insights in terms of what we're currently doing. But we're interested to know, given the low levels of satisfaction, I'm hoping that there's some intention that we'll be doing some things differently in the future. So the question, just for our final audience poll, is to what degree do you expect your organisation's approach to talent management to change over the next few years? So you can be pushing your buttons while we have a conversation here in the studio. So thinking about what we've said about how, you know, the way the sort of the land lies today, and the need to be driven by business strategy, what do we think some of the challenges are going to be for you in your organisations in terms of making it relevant for the future business context? Claire, do you want to?
I think there are going to be a number of shifts, or I hope there are, so that we stay relevant and value add. One thing I can see, and this sort of links back to the previous conversation around workforce demographics, and we've got this growing cadre of much younger people coming into the workforce, and as you said, Karen, we've also now accepting the fact that actually the older generations are going to want to work and stay with us for longer, or need to,
because
indeed.
their children aren't leaving home.
So what does that mean? Because when I look at talent management processes, you know, we tend to take quite a standardised approach and a one size fits all, and I just don't believe that is going to be appropriate going forward. Now, you know, we don't like to talk about it sometimes, but I truly believe we're going to have to move to a much more differentiated approach, do different things for different parts of our workforce, and that's going to be a big one for us. I think the other big shift, and I can see signs we're beginning to do this, but also it speaks to the processes. Conversation we had was, you know, we've got to start leveraging technology. You know, the business is doing it, but I sometimes think HR lags behind in being able to pick up digitalisation, really use technology to speed up recruitment processes, development, etc. So we've got to get much smarter and also bring the data analytics in to create the insights. Instead of just putting data on the table, we've got to bring real insights to our business leaders.
One of the commentaries that's just come through from one of our audience is they're noticing that one of the core capabilities is that individuals who are comfortable with ambiguity, comfortable with change, you know, thrive in that so-called VUCA world, are actually sort of rising to the top. How do we, you know, not everybody is in that category. So you've got individuals who are different. Companies have different language for this, solid performers. You know, they're doing a good job, but they're not going to set the world alight. Any thoughts or observations in terms of, you know, the impact of that going forward?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
It is. That's why we're near the end. So I thought we'd
I agree with the point that Claire made. I mean, one size fits all is definitely not going to work, and I don't think you know, characterising, you know, a company is, you know, fast moving or slow. I think you've got to think slow and think fast.
Yeah. Everywhere
now, you know, you've got to do both. It's tricky. I don't know, the ambiguity thing. I mean, I suppose what we're finding is that the demands of the next generation are somewhat different. You know, the expectations are different, and I think what we're trying to do is respond to that in a way that sort of makes it attractive to come in, because I don't think there's really much choice, to be honest with you, but to cater for the different people. Yeah. So one of our sort of real things that we, you know, on every level, so we mentioned diversity earlier, I mean, is to really celebrate the diversity in all its forms, you know, and really it's okay. You know, anything's okay. So, you know, like for example, we got rid of our dress code policy a few years ago. So we don't have one anymore. You know, so just to stop just to try to take the barriers away, you know.
So
it's one of the things we do. We do lots not very well. We do that quite well, you know. And
so thinking about how do we make this workplace inclusive for the different range of people.
One of our values is I can be myself here in terms of
Okay.
work, and that's what we really try and do. You know, you can be yourself, and you don't have to conform to any stereotype whatsoever.
Okay.
And that means if you're 60 years old, you can be yourself. If you're 26 years old, you can be yourself. You know, and whatever else goes with that.
And you're seeing that's likely to be a trend that increases in the future.
My personal view is that you know, it is slightly sector specific, I suppose, selfishly, but I don't think there's a choice.
No. Okay. Nick, did you want to?
Just picking up on both of those points. I think one area we can go into is I think we can really learn from marketing.
Yes.
As a function, I think there's an awful lot, and we don't, I think, talk to marketing about things like their ability to segment, mass customization, the market of one. You know, most fast-moving organisations are having to deal with an incredibly fragmenting market that they're trying to sell into. The fact there's now transparency, so things like Glassdoor, etc., people know about your organisations probably more than even you do, and they don't go into your website to find out about you. So I think that's an area, it's a practical thing. I think just going and talking to marketing and understanding some of the tools and the technologies, particularly in social media, that we can adopt and apply and think about, you know, actually the consumerisation of talent. Josh Bursin, one of the leading thinkers in the field, I think he had a great statement he made recently. He said that, you know, the war for talent is over and talent has won.
Yes.
Because LinkedIn, I'm sure we're all on LinkedIn, that gives talent an enormous amount of power, and we need to think like marketing. Yeah.
And that came up, both the research, the number of individuals who are coming out of the marketing function to head up talent. So Natasha at Virgin East Coast is probably, you know, one of the most prominent examples. And we were talking last week about the fact that certainly in that sector, so where you've got trains or planes where the crews are forever changing, you can't have a traditional line manager influencing. You've got to have a higher order, and in a sense the brand there becomes the thing against which they can recruit and the values and things there. So you know, using that segmentation.
And it's the consumer brand and the employer brand.
Yes, and if there's a disconnect between that, then not only do you hear that on Glassdoor, but you see that in terms of you know, their experience with the brand, and that'll soon appear on Twitter. Absolutely. I'm just in terms of, let's see, the poll results have come through. So we've got 65%, just over 65%, so 70% of you online are saying that you're expecting it to change. Interestingly, a very small percentage are only thinking that it's going to change substantially. My eyesight isn't good enough to see. I think it's less than 1% are saying that they think it's going to change substantially. People are actually hedging their bets, so 41% are saying. So interesting that here in the room there's perhaps more thoughts about how things might change. Just thinking, picking up on that, you know, from your point of view, what are you actually working on at the moment that you think? So we've heard about the sort of segmentation strategy. We're thinking about how do you make it attractive for anybody and everybody. Any other things that you're needing to pay attention to within your organisation to make it fit for the future? Eleanor, you?
I think it's not particularly a highbrow answer, but it's something that's made me think
good.
This conversation. I mean, I really do think that we need to know who we have in our organisations better than we do today. So I don't know about other organisations, but what I do know about ours is that we've grown exponentially over the last decade or so. And when I started at Rolls-Royce, it was a relatively small organisation. You could probably put your arms around it. It was one market, and you knew who the talent was, and they probably looked like you and went to the same schools and all of that. And now, you know, our challenges, we're a big organisation, we're global, we've got different market segments, we've got people all over the world. And yet if you look at our talent pipeline, the one that we identify, and that could be from succession planning or HiPots, or they still look very traditionally sort of British, There's a whole gender thing in our industry anyway.
Yeah.
And I remain absolutely convinced that there is talent beyond Derby. I really do.
What a radical thought there.
But it goes as far as Leicester.
But one of the problems is a lot of our business leaders, our function leaders, are also based in the UK. So how do we know our talent more? How do we spot them? Because the bright, shiny, agile, fast-thinking changelings, will always...
They'll pop up
anywhere. But a big part of our organisation needs people who just are really good at what they do. Just really be good at what they do, the best at what they can do, world-class specialist experts, scientists that are at the leading edge. How do we spot them, and how do we keep them engaged and motivated, and how do we better lead and manage them so that we're getting everything we possibly can from them, whether they're based in China, Singapore, the US, Germany, wherever.
Okay, we're in the last 5 minutes, so I'm just going to start pulling some of the threads together. But I think that last point you made, there was big conversation last week certainly around that challenge of, if you've got individuals who are good performers, but they in a sense are blockers for potential coming through. That was one of the challenges where there was a big conversation, do you move those people on? But just in terms of wrapping up in this last 5 minutes, just interested to hear from the panel any additional sort of thoughts or insights that this conversation has provoked, or any top tips that you want to share with our audience. So can I come to you first, Nigel?
A simple one, really. Sort of a little sort of 3-point sort of mission statement, if you like, that we try and really promote, which is, in terms of talent development, it should be led by me, supported by my manager, and backed by the organisation. And that's what we try and practice.
So again, so that comes back to the personalisation. So if it's led by me,
self-directed to begin with, but create the environment around that to help that self-direction.
I have to be able to articulate it.
Yeah, but help it flourish. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Claire.
I think for me, I'm just linking back to, grounding everything within the business. I think it's apply the same expectations to talent management that your business leaders have. So, know what it takes to win in the business, and then translate that back to talent outcomes.
Brilliant, thank you. Eleanor?
I think from an HR perspective, I would say to people, try and make life as easy as possible for individuals who are trying to develop, and also line managers who are trying to help talent develop. And I think it's less about the tools and the frameworks. Personally, I think it's about, I'd like to see us invest much more in helping managers have great career conversations and be comfortable and confident to have those conversations with people.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Building on that with something which I think is just very, very practical and simple. I think everything you've said has an implication for where we spend our time. Physically, where are we? I think I see too many people in their HR offices tinkering with processes, etc. Whereas I think what you've all said, the implications, we need to be out in the business, challenging objectivity, translating the strategy in real time, and then engaging leaders at every single level in the organisation to have, as you just said, fantastic conversations. You don't do that sitting in an office. You've got to be out there.
And then I think also showcasing and communicating and shouting about those line managers who are doing it really well. Because undoubtedly in all of your businesses you've got people who are doing it well, but sometimes they're not, a light isn't shone on them enough. So good. Well, thank you. So I wanted to say thank you to the panellists here in the room for a good conversation, and also to all of you online who've participated and sent questions through. For those of you who haven't been, if you've got colleagues who haven't been able to join us, then the recording of this webinar will be available through the CRF website for the next few weeks, and also there's a Twitter conversation, and our experience from previous webinars is that Twitter conversation carries on in quite a lively fashion, at least for the rest of today. So hashtag CRF Talent, and if you go on to the CRF YouTube channel, you will also be able to pick up anything from the research previously as well. So just picking up on some of the thoughts that have come through from the audience, I think what we're hearing is that a lot of the challenges that we've picked up in the research are live in a lot of organisations. Nobody out there has the single answer, but there are some pockets of good practice. But in terms of us being realistic about the influence we can play, it's more about getting to the heart of the conversations with our line managers and enabling them to do what's needed for the business. So I'd just like to thank everybody for their time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.